Let us bow in prayer. Eternal and gracious God, your life-giving love is at work each day bringing life. Your love is so strong it never tires of seeking to draw us closer and closer to your heart. Help us to be open to your closeness each day. Help us to be open to you in a special way in these next few moments, that through my words, through our thoughts, through our meditations, and in spite of them all, we may gain an added measure of your truth and of your love. We ask this in Christ's name. Amen. How many of you remember the TV program from the 1960s called Beverly Hillbillies? And some people have seen the movie that took place many years later. Well, the story, to remind you, begins in Tennessee amongst a very backward hillbilly family. The family consists of Jed Clampett, his daughter Ellie Mae, his mother-in-law Daisy Moses, called Granny, and a nephew who lives with them, Jethro Bodine. And probably most of us can remember the opening song of the show, and I won't sing it for you today, but it tells the story. And the situation is that one day Jed is out shooting for food. He discovers some black stuff bubbling out of the swamp. It turns out it's oil, and he and his family are now instant millionaires. People think Jed should move out of his log cabin in the woods now that he's a millionaire. And Jethro, the nephew, who's about 20 with a grade 6 education, says California is where all the rich people move. And Jed's perplexed by this decision, so he asks his cousin Pearl if she thinks he and his family should move. And Pearl says words to this effect: "Move? Should you move? Jed, you live in a log cabin that has no electricity, no running water. You live 5 miles from your nearest neighbor. You're overrun with skunks every year. You have to hunt just to find enough food for the table. In winter, you have to chop ice and melt snow just to find water. The outhouse is 50 feet from your back door. You are bothered with bears and possums and raccoons. Move, should you move? Just look where you live." And after a long pause, Jed says, "You're right, Pearl. A man would be a dang fool to go and leave all this." Sometimes you find thankful people, regardless of their circumstances, like Jed Clampett. In today's reading from the Gospel of Luke, we encounter a Samaritan who is a thankful person. The story is told that 10 lepers call out to Jesus for healing. Now, in those days, a person with a horrible skin disease, a condition, and there were many diseases, but they called it all leprosy. And when you had that disease, you were banned from the community. They were forced to live in little colonies on the edge of town, sometimes hiding in caves or at the garbage dump. They were required by religious law to call out at a distance to passers-by, saying, "Unclean, unclean," to warn people so that no one would come close, because everyone believed that the leprosy was very contagious. And so they begged for charity in order to survive. Now Jesus and his disciples are walking along, the scriptures tell us, when these 10 cry out to Jesus, "Master, have mercy on us." Now we're told that where they're traveling is between Samaria and Galilee. So it's a mixed group of Samaritans and Jews that are amongst the 10 men. Although the prejudice of the day would have kept Jews and Samaritans from mixing together, the disease forced them together in a new community of suffering. So Jesus instructs them to go and show themselves to the priest. And the reason is, according to biblical law, if you had a skin condition, you were to show yourself to the priest, who would declare whether it was leprosy or not, and then you had to be banned from the community. If you were healed, you had to go back to the priest and show yourself, so the priest could declare you healed. There's 2 healings taking place. One is the physical healing needed, but there's also the healing of restoration to the community that was needed. That's why the priest's examination was so important. A confirmation you're healed, you can come back, you can be welcomed home to your family. So when Jesus sends them, the 10 people are not healed yet, but they obey Jesus and they walk towards the priest, and as they're walking, that's when the healing takes place. The miracle takes place because they're obedient, we're told. But once healed, they may still travel on to the priest. They haven't arrived yet. And in the story, one of the 10, the Samaritan, stops going to the priest before he gets there, and he returns to Jesus to glorify and praise God and to bow at Jesus' feet and offer thanks. Now Jesus in the story looks around and says, where are the other 9? Is it only the Samaritan? Is it only the foreigner who gives thanks to God? And then Jesus says to the Samaritan who has already been healed, get up and go on your way. Your faith has made you well. Now scholars tell us that this phrase, made you well or wellness, is also the Greek word used for salvation. So it has 2 or 3 meanings. So he's saying, get up and go on your way. You've been saved because of your faith. In other words, you've been restored to God. You have seen and experienced the kingdom. You've been touched by God's love. You've been made one with God. Phrases like all that get at the meaning of salvation, which is about wholeness. Now, I'm sure the other 9 were excited and grateful in their hearts for their good fortune to be healed. I don't doubt it. They also were obedient to Jesus by following his instructions to go to the priest so the healing could be documented and they could be restored. But according to the passage, they weren't thanksgiving people. They did not know how to return thanks to God or to Jesus for this miracle like the Samaritan did. On this Thanksgiving Sunday, we follow a tradition that has been established in North America for well over 300 years. It began, as you know, with the first English colonists on the east coast of the United States, who offered, first of all, a service of thanksgiving and prayer to God for their safe arrival across the Atlantic and for the bounty and the wonder of the new land that they had come to. Our traditions tell us, and history verifies it, that very soon this time of Thanksgiving also involved a feast of the bounty of the crops that they grew and the wild game that the land produced. It was shared with the First Nations people who had met them and who showed the Europeans how to survive in the new land. When I was a young person, I thought that Thanksgiving was a time in which you were supposed to feel thankful, more grateful than at other times. And I'd work hard at it, trying to feel more thankful on that day. And sometimes I just couldn't feel any more thankful than usual. But really, that's not what Thanksgiving is about, trying to feel more thankful. Thanksgiving is really a time of remembering to give thanks for the blessings that we receive, but most importantly, to act upon that remembering by giving thanks to the one who gives the blessings of life, giving thanks to God. Sometimes we ask, how can we be thankful when there are often so many struggles and trials in life, some more difficult than others? And people of faith will often relate that it is in the difficult times that they see what is important in life. It is in the trials and struggles that vision becomes clear and the blessings of God are noticed and thanks is given. I've often experienced the most thankful people to be those who have very few material goods, or those who are grieving over the loss of a loved one, but who can find good in the midst of bad, who will rejoice in the gift of the person who has died. I often find people who are struggling with health or finances or difficulties in their work or relationships. They're the ones who notice the details of life. Sometimes they're the ones who have the sense of God's care holding and lifting them and who are truly thankful for the strength they receive. So my experience is that in times of struggle, people often turn to God and their vision becomes clearer to notice the love and the care of God who's been holding them up, and thanksgiving is offered. I've told you over the years stories about a neighbor, a good neighbor friend of ours when I was growing up in Strasbourg, and we called her Auntie Clarabelle. When Auntie Clarabelle was 86 years of age, she was at that point blind in one eye and had very poor vision in the other, was no longer able to live in her own home, and she was unable to play the piano, to read the music. She loved playing the piano, and she was no longer able to go to church, which had always been a big part of her life. She was in a wheelchair at that moment because she had fallen and broken her leg, and she hadn't regained the strength she needed to walk. But she was also one of the most genuinely thankful people I knew. She told me in those circumstances that she offered a prayer of thanksgiving every day. She always said thank you for her clear mind, for the nursing home she was in, the wonderful care she received, and for the blessings that God gave her each day. And Auntie Clarabelle is not and was not unique. You know many people like her, who to the outside world look like people we should feel sorry for because life is hard. But when you speak to them, you realize they have a sense of God's closeness and blessing and live a life of thanksgiving, which is expressed not only in their praise of God, but in their kindness, in their generosity, in their positive attitude towards others. And while we may have the question of how to be a people of thanksgiving in times of difficulty, the Bible today in Deuteronomy has a different and far more important question, the tougher one. How to be a thanksgiving people in the midst of abundance and plenty. You see, the story is told today in Deuteronomy of Moses preparing the people to enter the promised land after 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. And in those 40 years, they learned how to be a people. They received the 10 Commandments. They got to know God who had provided for their needs. And now they're ready to be into where life is easier. And the warning of Moses, which is really directed to the generations that will come after, is that we are to be a thankful people even when we have everything. That's the much tougher call. Listen to Deuteronomy 8, 11, 14 again. Take care that you do not forget the Lord your God by failing to keep God's commandments, God's ordinances, and God's statutes, which I am commanding you today. When you have eaten your fill, and have built fine houses and live in them, and when your herds and flocks have multiplied, and your silver and gold is multiplied, and all that you have is multiplied, then do not exalt yourself, forgetting the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. See, one of our great problems that separates us from God and from being a thanksgiving people is that we are forgetful as soon as things go well. And maybe it's just me, but maybe you're like that too. If things are going well, you forget. When life is good, when material possessions are abundant, when success is near to us, that's when we begin to think that we've done that. We're self-made people. You ever heard the people say, I'm a self-made person, or he's a self-made man, she's a self-made woman? It's all a big lie. Those attitudes, there's no room for God in that attitude. But it is precisely in those moments of goodness and life that we need to remember who we are. We are children of God. We are blessed and cared for and loved by God. And we're called to give God thanks for those blessings. We're called to be a little bit humble. Now, how do you give thanks for the blessings? How do you become a truly thanksgiving people in the midst of plenty, which is the hard time? The Bible is clear in Deuteronomy. It's simple. By keeping God's commandments, keeping God's ordinances and statutes. In other words, when we remember to live for God, when we remember to offer praise to God, when we remember to live faithful and ethical, Christ-like lives, that's how we remember to be thanksgiving people. When we remember that all we have is but on loan for a short time in the larger picture of history. When we remember that our life and all the good in it is but a gift from God to be used wisely and carefully and shared generously with others, then we'll remember, get those priorities right, then we are truly a thanksgiving people. In 2 Corinthians today, Paul is writing to the church, and what he's doing, he's in the midst of a fundraising campaign. That's what he's doing. He's writing to them, urging them to be generous in their givings to the campaign to raise funds amongst all the churches to help out the poor church in Jerusalem. Now, if we were doing that campaign, as we do with our Mission and Service Fund, trying to convince people to share with those in need across the church, the country, and the world, we'd focus on the needs, wouldn't we? We'd show poor children in Africa. We would show sick people in the hospitals being visited. Paul doesn't do that. He focuses on faith and upon God. Paul asks the church to give generously. Why? Because they've been given generously to by God. In other words, they're thanksgiving. If they remember the blessings, then you need to bless. They've been given the gift of faith. He says, think about it. The list. The gift of salvation, the gift of knowledge of Jesus Christ, of his life, death, and resurrection. And so Paul asked them to give generously to God so that God would be glorified and thanksgiving would be offered by those who would receive the help. They would say thank you to God. And also by those who give it out of gratitude for all that God has given them. It is, in other words, a sign and a means of being a thanksgiving people, to live generously, to live in love for our neighbor, to live in thanksgiving and offer praise to God always. Today's Thanksgiving Sunday, so our church has been decorated, music and prayer has been offered. Many of us will have a feast with family or friends over the next day or so, and will mark Thanksgiving. But as Christian people, Thanksgiving does not end today or tomorrow. We are to become Thanksgiving people always. And we do that by becoming people who remember to honor God each day, remembering to live for God by loving others, and as a sign, as a way of saying thank you for the blessings and love and the gift of life that is ours, that surrounds us and fills us. Amen.